All right, this is the copyright disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. And this video is not for any monetary gain. It is explicitly for the reasons stipulated in the Copyright Act of 1976 under Section 107.
Vladimir Putin announced this week that Russia will begin using the Chinese yuan for international payments instead of the dollar. Saudi Arabia is also in talks with Beijing to do the same thing. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, they're in talks with Iran as well to consider an economic alliance with China and Russia. And they can even be joining the BRIC countries, which is an acronym for these countries here: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries all have emerging economies. So what happens if our economy and the U.S. dollar are no longer the world's dominant currency? Former Assistant Treasury Secretary and host of the Monica Crowley podcast, Monica Crowley, is here to weigh in. Monica, great to see you this morning. Let's start right there. What happens if these emerging economies move away from the U.S. dollar towards the Chinese yuan?
Well, good morning, Will. It's great to be with you. And it's really hard to overstate exactly how catastrophic the abandonment of the U.S. dollar would be as the world's global reserve currency. Look, since the end of World War II, the dollar has been the safe place to go, and it's been backed up by a couple of things. It originally was backed up by gold, but President Nixon took us off the gold standard, so there's no hard asset backing up the dollar anymore for the last 50 years. But also it's been backed up by the strength and economic power of the United States and the fact that oil has always been traded in dollars. If that were to end, that would mean the end of the U.S. dollar. Look, there is a perfect storm happening right now, Will. The world's reserve currency being that, having that status has been a real privilege, but we've abused the privilege by wholly reckless monetary and fiscal policies over many years, certainly over the last couple of years, which has really devalued the dollar. On top of that, now you do have this perfect storm of Biden's weakness, his war on American domestic energy production, the Ukraine war, and as you point out, because of all of these things, we've got America's enemies led by China forming a new economic bloc. And all it would take at this point now, because we're at this pivotal moment, Will, is for Saudi Arabia, who has indicated that they're open to this, to say, you know what, we're going to be open to considering other currencies to trade in oil. If that were to happen, there would be a complete implosion of the global economic system, but certainly the American economic system. And if that were to happen, you'd be looking at sky-high inflation, just raging Weimar Republic kind of inflation. If you think inflation is bad now, just wait. But more importantly, we would lose our economic dominance and we would lose our superpower status.
Monica, the world's reserve currency, you said it's a privilege for the United States for the dollar to have been the world's currency. How does that relate to each individual American? How has that changed or impacted or improved our lives throughout the last several decades?
Yeah, I mean, it's given the United States incredible dominance in the world in terms of the economic system and in terms of trade. It's kept prices down. So whether it's energy prices, whether it's your food prices, the entire global economic system is reliant on the safe and secure dollar. But that is no longer true, again, because we've been printing money like crazy and devalued the power of the dollar and the value of the dollar. But on top of it now, again, oil is the critical linchpin of this. If Saudi Arabia decides to join with America's enemies here and start trading oil in different currencies, that is going to undermine the entire global economic system. And here at home, you know what it's going to mean for us? It's going to mean raging inflation, so much worse than anything we have ever experienced, Will.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, they're setting it up so that they can then come to the rescue by introducing central bank digital currencies. If they were to do that, and the United States already has a pilot program, that means the loss of your individual economic freedom, because the government will have total access and control of everything you buy and sell, and the ability to turn it off like that.
Ominous warning. I hear you. Saudi Arabia is the tipping point. Oil trading in dollars is the tipping point.
What happens when three nations simultaneously decide that American aircraft are no longer welcome in their sovereign airspace, effectively ending 7 decades of unchallenged hemispheric surveillance dominance? At 08:47 hours this morning, Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez issued Decree 0847, closing Venezuelan airspace to all American military and reconnaissance aircraft. Within 18 hours, Cuba took the identical step, followed by Iran's announcement of 4 warships deploying to international waters off Venezuela's coast. This isn't coincidental timing or parallel policy development. This represents coordinated military synchronization designed to close surveillance routes that the United States has considered guaranteed since 1952. For the first time in modern history, we're witnessing 3 nations simultaneously activate advanced air defense systems backed by sophisticated anti-access capabilities specifically targeting American air superiority in strategically critical regions. I spent 11 years analyzing security architecture in emerging markets at the IMF, and I've observed numerous challenges to American air dominance. China's forced landing of the American EP-3 spy plane at Hainan in 2001, Bolivia's diversion of President Evo Morales' aircraft under suspicion of American surveillance in 2013. But I have never witnessed 3 countries simultaneously closing airspace to the United States with advanced air defense system support in coordinated fashion. The scale of what has been accomplished is staggering. Venezuela has positioned 12 Russian S-300VM air defense missile batteries at 6 strategic points, each capable of tracking 100 targets simultaneously at ranges up to 200 kilometers. Cuba has activated 4 Russian resonance radar systems that can detect American stealth aircraft at distances of 400 kilometers. Iran has deployed domestically produced Bavar 373 air defense systems with capabilities equivalent to Russian S-400 systems. Together, these 3 countries have created an access denial network covering 5 million square kilometers of strategic airspace, fundamentally altering the surveillance landscape that has defined American hemispheric dominance since the early Cold War. This represents the collapse of assumptions that have guided Pentagon planning for generations, that American aircraft could operate with relative freedom in international airspace near strategic targets. The historical context reveals decades of systematic American airspace violations that created the conditions for today's coordinated response. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, American U-2 spy planes conducted over 400 documented flights without authorization from Havana's government. On October 27th, 1 aircraft was shot down, killing pilot Rudolph Anderson, yet the
most powerful economy in history just admitted defeat. Not on a battlefield, not in a boardroom, but in a phone call that lasted exactly 47 minutes. On December 15th, 2025, something unprecedented happened. The U.S. Treasury Secretary placed a call to Beijing, not to negotiate, not to threaten, but to beg. For the first time since World War II, the American empire is on its knees asking its enemies for permission to survive. You think you understand what's happening in the headlines? Trade wars, sanctions, geopolitical chess moves. But you're watching the theater while the real drama unfolds backstage. What you're about to learn will change everything you believe about the global economy. Behind closed doors, 3 separate meetings took place this week that prove the American century is mathematically over. The first meeting was in Washington. The second was in Beijing. The third was in a bunker 200 feet below Riyadh. Each meeting had the same agenda: save the dollar, at any cost. But here's what they discovered in those rooms. The patient is already dead. They're just arguing over who pays for the funeral. I've spent 15 years inside the machinery of international finance. I've watched empires rise and fall from the trading floors of London to the central banks of Asia. What I'm seeing now is not a recession, not even a depression. It's a liquidation sale. The United States is selling off everything that isn't nailed down to pay a debt that can never be repaid. And the buyers? The very countries Washington spent decades trying to destroy. Let me show you the 3 phone calls that changed history. Call number 1 happened at 3:17 a.m. Eastern Time. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen calling her counterpart in Beijing. The conversation was supposed to last 10 minutes. It went on for 47. Why? Because for the first time in American history, the U.S. was asking China not to attack them economically, but to save them from economic suicide. The United States needs to sell $5.2 trillion in new debt this year. That's not a typo. $5.2 trillion. More than the entire GDP of Japan, just to keep the government functioning for 12 months. But here's the nightmare. Their biggest customers have stopped buying. China used to absorb hundreds of billions in U.S. Treasury bonds every quarter. Today they're selling, not slowly, not quietly, in massive chunks that make the bond market shudder. Japan, traditionally America's most loyal financial ally, is liquidating U.S. debt faster than they accumulated it. They're not doing this to hurt America. They're doing it to save themselves. Europe? They're broke. Their banks are choking on their own government debt. They can't bail out America when they can't even bail out themselves. So who's left to buy $5.2 trillion in American IOUs? The Federal Reserve. The U.S. Central Bank buying debt from the U.S. Treasury with money printed by the U.S. Bureau of Engraving. This isn't economics. This is a Ponzi scheme with nuclear weapons. And Janet Yellen knows it. That's why she spent 47 minutes begging Beijing not to crash the system that's already crashing itself. But China's response was even more terrifying than the call itself. They said yes, not because they want to save America, but because they want to control the speed of its collapse. Call number 2 happened 6 hours later, this time from Beijing to Riyadh. The Chinese finance minister calling the Saudi crown prince. The conversation was brief. 1 question, 1 answer. The question, are you ready? The answer, we've been ready for 2 years. Ready for what? The end of the petrodollar. For 50 years, every drop of oil sold on planet Earth had to be purchased with US dollars. This created artificial demand for American currency. Even countries that hated America had to stockpile dollars just to buy energy. This was the United States' secret superpower. They could print unlimited money, and the world had to absorb it. They could run infinite deficits, and the world had to finance them. But that was before the sanctions. When Washington froze Russian assets in 2022, they sent a message to every nation on Earth. Your money isn't safe in our system unless you obey our politics. Saudi Arabia heard that message loud and clear. For 2 years, they've been quietly building alternative payment systems, digital currencies that bypass New York entirely, oil contracts denominated in yuan, not dollars. The call from Beijing wasn't a negotiation. It was a confirmation. The infrastructure is ready. The moment the U.S. pushes one sanction too far, the Saudis flip the switch. And when that happens, trillions of dollars currently parked overseas will have no reason to exist. They'll flood back into the American economy like a financial tsunami. The Federal Reserve will face a choice between 2 kinds of suicide: hyperinflation or economic collapse. Call number 3 was the most desperate of all. 11:30 p.m. Riyadh time. An encrypted call connected the Saudi Finance Ministry to a secure bunker outside Moscow. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. No translator was needed. They were both speaking the same language, mathematics. Russia has something the Saudis need: a battle-tested alternative to the Western financial system. For 3 years, Russia has survived the most comprehensive sanctions in human history. Not just survived, thrived. Their economy is growing, their currency is stable, their trade relationships are expanding. How? They stopped using dollars. Russia built what economists call shadow rails, parallel payment systems, alternative trade networks, bilateral currency swaps that make US sanctions irrelevant. The Saudis aren't just interested in this technology, they want to merge their oil infrastructure with Russia's financial immune system. When that merger is complete, the two largest energy exporters on Earth will be operating outside Washington's control. They'll be selling oil and gas to China and India in currencies that the Federal Reserve can't print or freeze. This is checkmate, but the United States isn't surrendering. They're doubling down. Last week, Congress approved a $200 billion emergency liquidity package. They're calling it infrastructure spending. But read the fine print.